Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Your Mark on the World show. I'm your host, Devin Thorpe, and our guest today is Cassidy McDonald. She is the Nick Kristof New York Times Win-A-Trip winner. She's a senior at Notre Dame. Cassidy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is officially now a tradition, now that you're on the show, because we had Nick's Win-A-Trip winner last year,
Meyer.
Austin Meyer. That's right. Austin. It's horrible. I'm glad you're put together. You're a professional. So Austin Meyer was on the show last year. We're excited. Nick Kristof is, of course, one of the great all-time journalists. Two Pulitzers, New York Times columnist, best-selling author. Really, I think one of the great deep thinkers of our time. So just give us a quick highlight. What was it like to spend a week or two traveling with Nick Kristof?
It was great. So unlike some of the past trips, we only went to places in the U.S. And so this was unique in that way, but I'm so glad that we did it, especially ahead of the election, that we could just be focused on what's going on in the U.S. So we went to Tulsa, Oklahoma for about 2 days in June. And then again last month, for about a week, we went to Arkansas and back to Oklahoma. And so, I mean, Nick, when you roll with Nick, it's just really a jam-packed schedule. It's great. He's got fantastic interviews set up just one after another. The person we've talked to is more amazing than the last, and it's really emotionally a roller coaster. And so it was great. We focused on a host of different issues. I've written about breastfeeding, and the socioeconomic divide with that, meth addiction, and so two very different women who have experienced meth addiction under different circumstances. One Native American woman who was really surrounded by addiction her whole life and her family, and then another woman, and this story will be coming out after Thanksgiving, but she had been abused as a little girl, which is all too common in addicts. So really, above all, just a heavy trip, heavy subject matter, but we looked at a lot of programs that were really working, and so it was very hopeful for me leaving there.
I'm curious about the process. You talk about being booked, one interview after another. When do you sit down and write something?
Oh my gosh, great question. So I would try to write at night, but above all, I think that I'm writing a lot now that I'm back at school after this trip, because it was really difficult to squeeze that in. And there were so many stories that it was hard to envision how they'd all come together as columns when we were in the moment. And so throughout that, Nick and I would be talking about, he'd say, okay, I think I'm going to write about this woman. And then, so that means that you can write about this woman because I won't include her. And so it's this jigsaw puzzle sort of as you go, but I think I have about 7 columns that I'm going to write completely over the next month. And then he did this really big, long piece sort of combining a lot of the people that we'd talked to, and he wrote that again also back, I think, in New York. So
when you were with him, when was he writing?
Yeah. He actually had to take the day off on Friday to write his Sunday column, which ended up, I don't think, even being about the trip itself, because there was so much election stuff going on. So this, I think, also was different than the overseas trips. And I'd heard from other winners that, he'd write on bumpy roads traveling between places and at night. But here he was sort of on the clock in a different way to monitor politics. And so I didn't see him writing as often, and I think that he would squeeze that all in on that Friday and after the trip.
Well, there's so much good stuff here. You mentioned that you're writing 7 more columns. Where will those be?
Oh yeah, so 7 total, I think. But those will be on Nick's blog, On the Ground blog, and so if you search for those, you can check them out. Search for Cassidy McDonald, New York Times. They'll probably come up.
That is awesome. Well, congratulations.
Thank you so much.
That's really an auspicious way to launch a career in journalism. So one of the things that Nick has written about in recent weeks, especially since the election, was the way that the media missed the outcome of the election. Nick himself had predicted that Hillary would win the election. I think he fully anticipated she would. And yet, one of the things he suggested the media needed to do was what you and he did together, to get out to Oklahoma and Arkansas, to the flyover states of this country and figure out what's going on there.
Exactly.
What do you think you learned, and what do you think you missed as you were there?
Well, yeah, I mean, like you said, I'm just so glad that, I'm a journalist. I've spent time in DC and New York for various internships, and I think that's news is so focused on the East Coast now, so this is a great chance for me to look at Washington policies, report on Washington by going to Tulsa, going to Arkansas. And so we looked at, crime and criminalization of addiction. I think that was the really eye-opening thing for me, because we saw this alternative program called Women in Recovery, and they really get to the heart of the trauma or the cause of the addiction. And so they spend, 5 months with a woman going through cognitive therapy, working on addressing these traumas that are really causing a lot of pain and causing the addiction. And they have such a lower recidivism rate than a normal, prison or correctional program. So that was something where I was like very glad that I could be there and see it in person, rather than, reporting on crime rates or something else from the East Coast. So that's something that I think that we did see. I mean, we certainly still missed Donald Trump. I mean, while we were there, we weren't asking people about the election, but I certainly still came away thinking that Hillary Clinton would win the election. But it's true that there are different economics in rural America, and I think there's a different atmosphere. And so we need to be looking at the drivers of those, welfare programs and poverty-related issues, I think, in America.
Now, you come from Wisconsin. You're studying at Notre Dame. Your perspective on the world is largely still from the heart of America, America's breadbasket, right? You're from this part of the world, as am I, the Republican part of the world. Do you think that Democrats just don't understand, the New York liberals don't understand what's going on in the heartland? Or do you think the people in the heartland are uninformed and insulated in their own way from the realities? And who's at fault, I guess? I mean, how do you reconcile those two Americas? What's going on?
Yeah, I definitely don't think that rural America is out of touch by any means. I think that, increasingly it's, especially in journalism, I will totally take this. I think that it's hard to get into journalism. You need to take a number of unpaid internships at the beginning. And so there's this weeding out that happens, and it's this elite field. And I think it's changing, and a lot of networks are doing a good job of changing that intentionally, but still it's a place with a certain background. And yeah, I think that there's less local media, and we really need to make an effort to talk to people. And not just journalists. I think that everyone needs to make an effort to reach out to someone on the opposite side of the political spectrum, in a different socioeconomic world, and just listen to them and listen to what's driving their decisions.
Yeah, fascinating. Well, one of the things you mentioned in our pre-interview interview, you talked about your experience in meeting this young woman who was almost exactly your age. And in fact, Nick also wrote about that interesting dichotomy.
There were actually two different girls who were almost exactly my age. He wrote about a different one, but yes, this one.
Oh, so there are two different girls.
Yes.
And I had confused that. So anyway, you encountered these girls who were similarly, basically your age, but in very different circumstances. Tell us a little bit about the one that you mentioned to me.
Yeah. So it was so weird. She was born less than 24 hours apart from me, just one day later. And so we came across this, and I mean, I got chills when I heard that. And then we met her and heard her story, and it was so different from the life that I've lived. And she's exactly my age. She's got, I think, 3 kids now. She came from a family with addiction, and then ended up in a meth addiction and opioid addiction herself, and ended up in a very abusive relationship at 17 or so. She dropped out of high school, got really stuck with this guy, and just in interviewing her, I could feel like the pain in her story. And I think that she hadn't told this story to many people. She was kind of new to recovery. And it was so hard hearing, she just told us in great detail. I mean, I think we asked something like, were you abused? And she told us everything that he'd done to her and just sobbed through it. And we later learned that she had PTSD. And so this must have been really hard for her to tell us all about it. And that was it was painful for me because I realized that there's this girl who I kind of thought I had this connection with for her being my age, but I had to just hear her story and then walk away, and leave her with the pain of having just told this and having relived this a little bit. And so that was difficult for me, and it was a reminder of how important and how much I need to honor these stories of these women who are being really brave and candid with their lives. So that was probably the most emotional moment of the trip for me.
It is a fascinating contrast. And as you think about it, what does it mean to you as you look back on that experience? What are the lessons you draw from that?
Yeah, I mean, I've learned that I need to make an effort to talk to people in reporting and not just research. And I think actually getting out and learning from another person and connecting with another person is why I got into this, and I need to remember to always do that as much as I can. And then that this isn't a game. These are people's lives, and telling their stories is so important. And I just hope that I'm able to do that well. And so it's this new motivation for me to hone my writing skills and tell these stories as best as I can.
Oh, well, it really is, I think, a powerful metaphor. The 2 lives you've led for life, I guess, for the rest of us to think about the importance of the circumstances we find ourselves in. And I guess those of us who are more privileged should perhaps feel that sense
right.
of privilege that we enjoy, because it has such a tremendous, our circumstances have such tremendous influence over our lives and our outcomes. So I hope she's able to overcome. Me
too. I will say I also came away from that feeling like silly even claiming anything on my resume, because so many people in my life and my circumstances have helped me along the way that, she's overcome so much more than me. And I've just been the happy beneficiary of a lot of people helping me along. Well,
you mentioned the people who've helped you along the way, and one of them that you mentioned is Tom.
Tom Protege.
Tom Protege, and I was fascinated. You told me a tiny bit about him, and I didn't spend a lot of time researching, but I pulled up his Twitter account, and I was fascinated by this. He has tweeted twice, and once, the most recent one from 2011. Was this tweet about how the Donald was gaining traction with the Tea Party. And I thought, what a tremendous, interesting, fascinating glimpse into history to see that even 5 years ago, there were signs that Donald Trump was going to be our president in 2016 or 2017. So Tom's been a big influence on your life. Tell us a little bit about Tom.
Yeah, so he is a Notre Dame alum, and he was an adjunct or a visiting professor for a semester, and so I met him that way. And this was sophomore year before I'd had really much experience, and he sort of sat me down and looked at my resume, and he said, these are the experiences that you should get. You should make sure you get print. And he sort of picked out things that he thought that would be helpful for me, and I've followed every bit of advice he's ever given me, and it served me very well. But yeah, so he's was the former executive producer of the CBS Evening News, Nightline, Discovery. I think there are more that he's been executive producer of. I'm probably forgetting some, but he's really an all-star journalist, but just the nicest guy. And you would not know how big of a deal he is when you meet him. But he's been on call for all sorts of advice throughout the years, and I'm really grateful to him.
Yeah, well, he's a very interesting guy, obviously, and a great influence on you. Well, I want to take advantage of your being here. We've just got a few more minutes, but I want to just ask you a couple of more personal questions. Clearly, you're someone I admire. Other people look up to you, but who do you look up to? Who do you see as a role model?
Yeah, well, certainly Nick Kristof, but we all know that because who doesn't love Nick Kristof? And you guys know about him. But someone that actually from the trip who I admire and who I've thought about a lot since my trip to Arkansas is a woman by the name of Annette Dove, and she was an elementary school teacher in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. She was married to a corrections officer, and she and her husband had always talked about doing something for the community that would be sort of an after-school feeding program or something where kids just had a space to be, because as a school teacher and a corrections officer, actually, they saw these kids in similar kids in different parts of their lives. And so they'd always talked about this, always dreamed about it. And then one day he died unexpectedly. And so she was distraught, but she's a very religious woman and saw this as a sign that she needed to do this, that they'd always talked about. And so he passed away, and she took all of her money, all of her own money, almost lost her house, and just threw it all into this program to feed kids. And it's so much more than that. And so we went and we visited that, and there are just hundreds of kids. There's mentorship. They take them on trips to see outside of Pine Bluff and see what greater world there is. All of these kids call her mama, and she's really just this stabilizing force for so many people in the community, and just has put her whole heart into it. And so she was tremendous, and just reminded me that anyone can make a difference. You don't have to be rich. You can be a blue-collar background and make a huge impact for so many people.
Now, that is a great role model, great lesson to take from that as well. You are a super talented young woman. You could be doing anything. Why journalism, and why this brand of journalism? Why aren't you chasing Brad Pitt around Hollywood?
Well, that would be fun, but I'll say that I think that I'm drawn to journalism because I'm so curious, and I love connecting with other people and hearing about what drives them. And specifically this brand of journalism, I think, is because I'm so privileged. I feel this obligation to use this, whatever voice I do have and whatever position I have in society, to speak for people who don't have so much of a voice. And so many times we encounter that people who you never would hear their stories, and they may be experiencing injustices because of that. And so I think that I have an obligation morally to speak for them. But then beyond the ethical reasons, I think there's also just a good journalism reason to do this brand of journalism, because like we talked about, I think journalism is getting so East Coast centric. It's very elite. And I think that it's really important to speak to all of America and hear everyone's story.
I think that's a great principle to follow, and I really respect your thinking on that. We like to ask all of our guests for an impact hack, a tip that would help us to do more good in the world. I see you as someone who's doing a lot of good. What's your impact hack?
Well, the most impact I've ever had is when I'm writing for the New York Times. So that's my one, is befriend Nick Kristof. No, but that's not real life for me either, actually. That's my unique moment. In my real life as a college student, I'm always thinking about this. I edit the school magazine, and we have a readership that's like that. And so I think that one for journalists specifically, and anyone trying to communicate their message, just think about simplicity and getting to the heart of the message, cutting out extraneous words and messages. But the other one that I think for anyone, it is trying to find someone who has a different perspective than you, and just when you're with them, be completely present and be open-minded and ready to learn anything And you'd be surprised at what people will share and the types of different people that you find you have a lot of common ground with. And then the third thing actually is something I've started doing is just writing down my long-term goals for anything really, and making time for them as often as I make time for my short-term goals. So that's my little trick for you.
Now, fantastic. Great tip. Great tip. Now, I wonder if you would give us a bonus, answer a bonus question for the benefit of all of those who might hope to apply for the Win a Trip contest with Nick Kristof at the New York Times this coming year. What advice would you give the applicants?
I would say, just to demonstrate to Nick a few things. One, that you can tell stories effectively, because I think above all, and I might be wrong, but my sense is that he's looking for someone who can spread the message as best as possible. And so demonstrate that you're able to do that. And secondly, point out that you have an open mind and that you're ready to experience anything. My trip was a little bit more tame than others, and so you may not be going to a hotel in Tulsa, but you may be going somewhere a lot more adventurous, and show to him that you're up for that. Even if you have never been on something like that before, just show him that you're ready to experience the world. What was
of course you were in Tulsa, what was the most sort of challenging thing that you experienced that relates to this idea you're talking about, being up for a challenge, up for an adventure?
Well, okay, this is going to sound less adventurous, but I will say the challenging thing for me, the first story I wrote was about breastfeeding, and Nick wanted me to write this because he was like, I'm a man, I shouldn't mansplain about this topic. You can write it because you're a woman. And I'm 20, I've never had a baby. I want to write about a story, and this is an opinion piece, so in a way I'm recommending breastfeeding and the health benefits that come along with it. But it was clearly a topic that was going to be fraught, because we're talking about different ethnic groups, different economic groups who breastfeed and who don't. And so I did so much research to make sure that I had a good sense of what all parties involved would think about this. So I talked to a lot of breastfeeding experts, and I hope that I did well by some people, and I hope I didn't shame anyone who didn't breastfeed. But my point was just that we need to lift women up who try to do this, because it's hard. It's really hard. And that's coming from someone who's never experienced it. But my sense is that it's hard to breastfeed.
Fantastic. Well, Cassidy, I could ask you 100 more questions. I would love to keep you longer, but I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us today. Really appreciate your insights, your sharing kind of that behind the scenes experience you had with Nick, and really congratulate you on the trip, on the opportunity to write for the Times, and all the other successes you're having related to this. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And we wish you every success in your career and in your efforts to help be a voice for those that don't have a voice.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All righty. Now let's do some good.